Story 1. The Vanishing Car. Tom parked his car in the mall's parking lot, far from the entrance. When he returned after an hour of shopping, his car was gone. Annoyed, he thought it had been towed, but after a quick search, he found it parked several rows down. Confused, but not thinking much of it, he got in and drove home. The next day, he parked at work, but when he came out, the car wasn't where he had left it. Again, it had moved to a different spot. This happened every day for a week, until one night, Tom decided to stay and watch. He hid behind a nearby vehicle, waiting. At midnight, his car's engine roared to life on its own. It backed out, then drove in circles around the lot, tires screeching, before returning to its original spot. When Tom approached, the car's headlights flickered on, and a voice from the radio whispered, "You took me from my resting place. Now I drive you to yours." Story 2. The Forgotten Corner. Sarah always parked in the same corner of her office's underground parking lot. It was darker than the rest, but always had open spaces. One evening she worked late. By the time she reached her car, the lot was almost empty. As she approached, she heard faint whispering and stopped. The lights flickered, casting long shadows across the concrete walls. She turned to see the corner she parked in was much darker than before, as if the shadows were thicker, more substantial. The whispers grew louder, coming from that dark corner. Heart pounding, Sarah ran for her car. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw shadows crawling across the walls, reaching out towards her. They seemed to gather where she had been parked, growing denser, almost human-like. The next morning, a maintenance worker was found dead in that very spot, his face frozen in terror. Sarah never parked in that corner again. Story 3. The Endless Parking Lot. Jim had just finished a late shift and was heading home. He walked to the parking lot, but when he reached it, something was off. The rows of cars seemed to stretch on forever, with no end in sight. He started walking, looking for his car, but every time he thought he was close, the lot stretched further. His phone had no signal, and the air grew colder. After what felt like hours of searching, he spotted his car far in the distance. He ran towards it, but it never seemed to get closer. Out of breath and desperate, he stopped, realizing he was lost in an infinite parking lot. Panic set in as the lights overhead began to dim, one by one. In the distance, a figure emerged, slowly walking towards him. It had no face, just a dark void where one should be. Jim screamed, but there was no one to hear him. Story 4. The Phantom Passenger. Lisa was heading home after a late night at the office. As she walked to her car, she noticed something odd in the reflection of the windows. Someone was sitting in the back seat. She froze, heart pounding, but when she looked directly at the seat, it was empty. Shaking off the fear, she got in and started the engine. The drive home was uneventful until she glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure was back, sitting motionless, staring at her. Panicked, she slammed on the brakes and turned around. Again, the seat was empty. Lisa sped home, but the feeling of being watched never left her. That night, as she tried to sleep, she heard soft breathing coming from the hallway outside her bedroom door. Story 5. The Abandoned Baby. It was past midnight when John walked through the deserted parking lot towards his car. As he neared it, he heard a faint crying. Looking around, he saw a baby carrier on the ground, partially hidden by shadows. Concerned, he approached, but as he got closer, the crying stopped. He leaned down to check, but the carrier was empty. Confused, he stood up, and the crying started again, louder this time, echoing through the lot. John backed away, his heart racing, but the crying followed him, growing more desperate. He ran to his car, but when he opened the door, the crying was coming from inside. Terrified, he looked around, but there was no baby, just an empty seat and the cold air. As he drove off, the crying faded, replaced by a soft whisper that said, "I was never found." Story 6. The Watchful Eyes. Megan always felt uneasy in the parking lot, especially at night. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. One evening after a late dinner with friends, she walked to her car alone. As she neared it, she felt that familiar chill and glanced around. No one was there. She hurried her pace, but the feeling intensified. She fumbled with her keys trying to unlock the door when she saw movement in her peripheral vision. She turned, and for a split second, she saw dozens of eyes staring at her from the shadows between the cars. They blinked out of existence as soon as she looked directly at them. Panicking, she jumped into her car and sped away, but the feeling of being watched lingered. That night, she checked her rearview mirror and saw the eyes again, staring at her from the back seat. Story 7. The Old Man. Jake was leaving the grocery store when he noticed an old man struggling to start his car. Feeling sorry, Jake offered to help. The old man thanked him and asked if he could give him a ride home, as his house was just a few blocks away. Jake agreed, and the man got in the passenger seat. As they drove, the old man was silent, staring straight ahead. When Jake reached the address the man had given, he turned to say goodbye, but the seat was empty. Confused, Jake looked around, but there was no sign of the old man. The car was still moving, but the door hadn't opened. When Jake turned back to the road, he saw the old man standing in the middle of the street, smiling eerily. Jake swerved, but when he looked back, the man was gone. The next day, Jake learned that an old man matching the description had died in that spot years ago. Story 8. The Glowing Handprint. Della was finishing her shift at the hospital and headed to the parking lot. She was exhausted and just wanted to get home. As she reached her car, she noticed handprints on the windows, glowing, faintly blue. She hesitated, looking around, but the lot was empty. The handprints seemed to pulse with light, and as she got closer she saw they were on every window, as if someone, or something, had been trying to get in. She wiped one of the handprints away, but it reappeared instantly. The air grew colder, and her breath fogged up the glass, revealing more handprints inside the car, all over the dashboard and seats. Terrified, she ran back to the hospital. The next day, when she returned to retrieve her car, the handprints were gone, but the windows were cracked as if something had tried to break out. Story 9. The Shadow Behind. Mark had always been a skeptic when it came to the supernatural. One night after a long drive, he stopped at a rest area to stretch his legs. The parking lot was empty, and the only light came from a flickering street lamp. As he walked back to his car, he noticed a shadow following him. It moved when he moved, but when he stopped, it stopped too. He turned around expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. Thinking it was just his imagination, he shrugged it off and got in his car. But as he drove away, the shadow stayed with him, visible in his mirrors, growing larger and darker. No matter how fast he drove, the shadow clung to his car, spreading across the interior. By the time he reached home, the shadow had engulfed the entire car. He ran inside, but the shadow slipped in through the door, following him, and the lights in his house flickered and died. Story 10. The Silent Scream. Anna worked late shifts at a 24-hour diner. The parking lot was always empty when she left, and it was a long walk to her car. One night, as she was leaving, she heard faint screams coming from somewhere nearby. She followed the sound but found nothing, just rows of parked cars. The screams grew louder, more desperate, and seemed to be coming from all directions. Panicked, she ran to her car and locked the doors, but the screaming continued, now sounding as if it was coming from inside the car. Anna covered her ears, but the screams only grew louder, filling her head. She started the car and sped off, but the screams followed her home. That night, she dreamed of people trapped in the darkness, their mouths open in silent screams. When she woke up, she could still hear them, faintly, just beyond the edge of hearing. Story 11. The Haunted Elevator. Jessica always parked on the top floor of the multi-story parking garage, where it was usually empty. One evening after a late movie, she headed to the elevator to get to her car. She pressed the button, and the doors opened immediately, revealing an empty elevator. As she stepped inside, the lights flickered and the elevator began to descend, even though she hadn't pressed a button. It stopped on every floor, the doors opening to reveal an empty parking level. Each time the doors opened, a cold gust of wind swept through the elevator, and she felt a growing sense of dread. On the 5th floor, the doors opened and Jessica gasped. The parking lot was not empty. Shadowy figures stood around her car, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. As the elevator doors closed, one of the figures turned its head and looked directly at her. When the elevator reached the top floor, she ran to her car, only to find it surrounded by the same shadowy figures, now closer, reaching out for her. Story 12. The Ticket Machine. David parked his car in the underground parking lot of a hotel where he was staying for a business trip. As he approached the ticket machine to pay for his parking, he noticed something strange. The machine was spitting out tickets one after another, the paper piling up on the ground. Curious, he picked up one of the tickets and saw it was dated for the next day, with a timestamp indicating an hour that hadn't occurred yet. The machine continued printing tickets, each with future dates and times. David felt uneasy and quickly paid for his parking. As he drove towards the exit, he glanced at the rearview mirror and saw someone standing near the machine, staring at him. The figure was gaunt and pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to follow his car as he drove away. When David checked the rearview mirror again, the figure was gone, but the unease lingered as he realized the time on his dashboard had jumped forward by an hour. Story 13. The Echoes. Melissa was leaving a concert and headed toward her car in the sprawling outdoor parking lot. The area was crowded, with cars honking and people chatting. But as she got closer to her car, the noises around her started to change. The sounds of voices became distant and echoing, as if they were being played back from a recording. The honking of horns and the chatter seemed to slow down, becoming distorted and eerie. It was as if she had stepped into a different dimension where everything was slightly off. When she reached her car, she heard someone calling her name, but when she turned around, there was no one there. The echoes continued, growing louder and more disjointed, repeating words she hadn't said, fragments of conversations she hadn't had. In a panic, Melissa got in her car and sped away, but the echoes followed her, distorting and overlapping until they were nothing but a cacophony of twisted voices. Story 14. The Empty Shell. Rachel had parked her car in an unfamiliar lot while visiting a friend in a different town. When she returned late at night, she noticed that all the other cars had left, and hers was the only one remaining. As she approached, she saw something odd. The car was open, with all the doors slightly ajar. She distinctly remembered locking it. When she looked inside, she found the seats, dashboard, and even the steering wheel were all stripped away, leaving nothing but a hollow shell. But the strangest thing was the smell, an overpowering stench of decay. Suddenly, Rachel heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see a group of people standing in the shadows, their faces obscured. They began to approach her slowly, and as they did, she realized with horror that they weren't people at all. They were empty shells, just like her car. Hollow, with no features, no eyes, no mouths, just blank, decaying faces. Story 15. The Unseen Driver. Alex had just finished a long shift at work and was heading to his car, parked at the far end of the lot. As he walked, he noticed a car a few rows away, its headlights flickering on and off. There was no one inside, but the car's engine roared to life. The car began to drive slowly through the parking lot, weaving between the rows of parked cars. Alex watched in disbelief as it made its way toward the exit. There was no one behind the wheel, no driver at all. The car stopped at the exit, as if waiting for something, and then the windows rolled down, revealing an empty interior. Alex stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Suddenly, the car's horn blared loud and jarring in the still night, and the car sped off, disappearing into the darkness. For weeks after, Alex kept seeing that same car in his rearview mirror, always trailing behind him, always empty. Story 16. The silent auction. Nancy was attending a charity event at an old hotel. The parking lot was small and crowded, so she had to park far from the entrance. After the event, she returned to her car to find a note stuck under the windshield wiper. The note was an invitation to a silent auction in the parking lot at midnight. Curious and slightly amused, she decided to stay and see what it was about. She heard voices near her car. She approached cautiously and saw a group of people gathered around an old rusted car. They were whispering and placing bids on something inside the car, though she couldn't see what it was. One of the bidders noticed her and smiled, beckoning her over. When she refused, the group turned towards her in unison, their faces pale and expressionless. They began to chant, their voices low and monotonous, and Nancy realized with horror that they were bidding on her. She ran to her car and drove off, but the memory of those pale faces haunted her dreams for weeks. Story 17. The Broken Clock. Sam's office parking lot had an old clock tower nearby, long since broken and stuck at midnight. Every evening as he left work, he glanced at the clock out of habit, but one night, as he headed to his car, he noticed the clock was ticking. The hands of the clock began to move forward, slowly at first, then faster, until they were spinning uncontrollably. Sam watched in disbelief as the clock reset itself to midnight and then started counting down, backwards. He felt an unnatural chill in the air as the parking lot grew eerily silent, all the usual city noises fading away. Suddenly, the lights in the parking lot began to flicker and dim, casting long, distorted shadows across the asphalt. Sam hurried to his car, but when he tried to start the engine, it wouldn't turn over. The clock tower's chimes rang out, but instead of a pleasant bell, it was a harsh, grating sound that made his skin crawl. He glanced at the clock again and saw it was counting down rapidly, as if racing toward some unknown event. The shadows in the parking lot began to move, creeping closer to his car, their shapes growing more defined, twisted figures with elongated limbs, their faces obscured by darkness. As the countdown reached 0, the shadows surrounded his car, their forms pressing against the windows. Just as the final chime rang out, the car roared to life on its own, the headlights blindingly bright. The figures recoiled, retreating into the darkness as Sam sped out of the lot. When he looked back, the clock tower was once again frozen at midnight, the ticking silenced, and the shadows were nowhere to be seen. Story 18. The Crimson Stain. Mia parked her car in the underground lot of her apartment building. It was a quiet evening, and the lot was nearly empty. As she walked towards the elevator, she noticed dark stains on the ground leading from a nearby parking space. At first, she thought it was oil, but as she got closer, the stains turned a deep crimson. The trail led to a car she hadn't seen before, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows. The stains seemed to be coming from under the car, as if something, or someone, had been dragged beneath it. Uneasy, Mia hurried to the elevator, but the doors wouldn't close. The elevator refused to move, trapping her in place. As she frantically pressed the buttons, the lights in the parking lot flickered, and she heard a faint dripping sound echoing through the concrete structure. The crimson stains began to spread, seeping towards the elevator. Panicking, Mia ran back to her car, but when she reached it, she found the same stains leading from her tires to the black sedan. In the darkness, she heard a door creak open, and when she turned, the sedan's driver's side door was ajar. A figure stepped out, covered in dark, dripping fluid. It began to move towards her, slow but deliberate, leaving a trail of crimson in its wake. Mia jumped into her car and drove out of the lot as fast as she could, but the stains never left her mind. The next morning, when she returned to the parking lot, both the black sedan and the stains were gone, but she could still smell the metallic scent of blood in the air. Story 19. The Whispering Wind. Liam had always parked his car in the same spot at the edge of the vast shopping mall parking lot. One evening, as he walked towards his car, he noticed a sudden breeze. The wind carried faint whispers, almost too soft to hear, but unmistakably there. Curiosity got the better of him, and he stopped to listen. The whispers grew louder, forming words he couldn't quite understand. It was as if the wind itself was speaking, urging him to stay, to listen closer. As Liam stood there transfixed, the lights in the parking lot began to dim one by one, leaving only his car illuminated. The whispers became clearer, repeating his name over and over, mingling with other voices, voices of people he didn't recognize. The wind picked up, circling around him, the whispers turning into frantic, overlapping cries. Liam realized they were warnings, pleas for help, voices of those who had disappeared in the area over the years, their fates unknown. The wind turned icy, and the voices grew desperate, but Liam finally broke free from their hold. He sprinted to his car, the whispers turning into screams as he fumbled with his keys. As soon as he started the engine, the wind died down, and the lot fell silent. He never parked in that spot again, but every time he passed by, he could still feel the chill in the air and hear the faintest echoes of those trapped voices calling out to him. Story 20. The Shadowed Reflection. Emily was leaving her friend's apartment late at night and walked through the dimly lit parking garage. As she approached her car, she caught a glimpse of something strange in the rearview mirror, a dark figure standing just behind her. Startled, she spun around, but no one was there. The garage was empty, the only sound her own nervous breathing. Shaking off the unease, she opened the car door, but as she did, she caught another glimpse of the figure in the side mirror, closer this time. She slammed the door shut and locked it, but when she looked in the rearview mirror again, the figure was sitting in the back seat, staring at her with hollow, empty eyes. Emily's heart raced as she turned around, but the seat was empty. The figure existed only in the reflection. Terrified, she started the car and drove off, but the shadow never left her mirror. It watched her the entire drive home, growing darker, more defined, until it seemed to be trying to reach out of the mirror and into the reach out of the mirror and into the real world. When she finally pulled into her driveway, she couldn't bring herself to look in the mirror again. She ran into her house and covered every mirror she owned, but that night in her dreams, the figure was there, waiting for her just beyond the glass. Story 21. The Silent Vigil. Carlos always parked his car near a small, neglected corner of the parking lot, where an old, broken-down car had been sitting for as long as he could remember. It was an eyesore, but no one ever seemed to move it. One night after finishing a late shift, Carlos noticed someone standing next to the old car. It was an elderly woman, her hair white and her clothes tattered. She didn't move, just stood there staring at the broken car. Feeling uneasy, Carlos approached cautiously. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked. But she didn't respond. She didn't even acknowledge him. Her eyes were fixed on the car, her expression blank. Carlos decided to leave her alone and walk to his car. As he drove past the old vehicle, he looked back and saw that the woman had vanished. The next day, he asked around about the car, and one of his co-workers told him a chilling story. Years ago, the car belonged to a young couple who had died in a tragic accident. The woman had been the mother of one of the victims, and she had disappeared shortly after the accident, never to be seen again. Carlos couldn't shake the image of the woman's vacant stare. The next time he parked in the lot, the old car was gone, but at night, he could still feel eyes on him, watching, waiting. Story 22. The Wrong Turn. Lucy was driving home late at night and took a wrong turn, ending up in an unfamiliar parking lot. The lot was vast and deserted, with only a few scattered cars that looked like they hadn't been moved in years. As she drove through, looking for a way out, she noticed the exit signs kept leading her in circles. No matter which direction she turned, she ended up back where she started. Frustrated and a little scared, she parked her car and got out to get her bearings. The moment she stepped out, she felt a sudden drop in temperature. The air was thick with fog, and the distant sound of footsteps echoed around her. But when she looked around, there was no one there. Lucy hurried back to her car, but when she tried to start it, the engine sputtered and died. The fog thickened, enveloping her car, and she heard the footsteps again, this time closer. She locked the doors and watched in horror as shadowy figures emerged from the fog, slowly closing in on her car. Their faces were obscured, their movements jerky and unnatural. They pressed against the windows, their cold breath fogging up the glass as they stared at her with hollow eyes. Lucy screamed, but no sound escaped her lips. The figures continued to close in until they were all she could see. The next morning, her car was found abandoned in the middle of the lot, but Lucy was never seen again.